Good day, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation number 165. Sort this out. There is a problem, and it's saying we're going live in 8 minutes.
You do appear to be live,
Don't
so
quite understand why, to be honest. That is weird. Don't think we're live at the moment. Can anyone in the chat hear me? If you can, please tell me. I don't think we are.
yeah, you are live.
Yeah, pretty sure we are.
I'm live on YouTube.
Whoop.
Oh, maybe that's the problem.
Yeah.
Am I? Okay.
Hmm.
I guess. August. How are you going, gentlemen?
Doing well. Glad to be back on after a little hiatus.
How are you going, gents?
Yeah, I'm also doing well, as always.
Hello.
Duke?
That's good. Okay. Yep. Hello.
Sounds like we got a delay.
What's going on here? Can you hear me okay, guys?
Oh.
Oh dear.
Oh well, he'll be back.
Yeah.
So, how have you been, Rupert? You've been trying to work on your channel this year, haven't you?
Yeah. The throughput is not as good, not as quick as I'd like, but I think it's turning into a nice little series. Mostly just still looking at Greeks and the sort of Greek monarchy, but I've already sort of found what I think are some pretty compelling revisionist points, I suppose, and sort of like peering through the veil of where certain bits of history have been propagandized a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, the Greek's been the Greek situation's been a focus of yours for a while, though, hasn't it? At least you were talking about. I remember your speech from almost coming on 2 years now. Was one of your big examples was the Greek example of. What was it? It was almost like an Arthurian legend, but the Greek version of.
Yeah, the Marble Emperor. I think it's
that was the one.
Constantine the 12th or Constantine the 11th. I can never remember exactly which, but that's a slightly different period. So I'm looking more ancient Greek at the moment, but somehow I end up coming back to the Greeks quite a bit.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's clear reasons for that, I suppose. But
yeah, getting into Rome soon enough, though, and that's pretty interesting in itself.
Yeah. Oh, are you back, Duke?
I believe I am. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep, sounds fine.
Can you hear me now? All right, not too much of a delay, guys. I'm so sorry, chat. Yeah, okay. Rupert, did you have a first subject you wanted to bring up this week?
It doesn't really seem like. I mean, unless I'm missing something or just mentally not in the same week because so much has happened. In terms of British politics, there doesn't seem to be that much going on other than, you know, Conservatives putting their foot in their mouth as usual and gradually, well, very rapidly speeding towards their hopefully 0 seats future. But yeah, other than that, I kind of had I was thinking recently in like actual practical terms, because I kind of get a little bit stuck on theory a lot of the time. Just trying to think about mentally wargaming, what would actually have to be done. So let's say, you know, we had power tomorrow. What would actually be the practical steps that you'd have to take to try and unwind all the damage and put us back on a good footing? And I think it's actually a pretty substantial list of things to do, and I wouldn't even know where to start, because you've got all things like the media, the opposition, and the way that they would try and capitalize on anything you actually try and do. You'd have the street politics to contend with. You'd have the civil service fighting against you at every stage. You might even have groups like the police and the armed forces not really wanting to comply. So how do you even begin to do all of this before you do things like trying to get the economy back on track?
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen that that debate that went around in the it was in the Great Methodist Hall in London. It was between Matthew Goodwin, of all people, and Konstantin Kisin, along with Aaron Bastani and another lady whose name escapes me. It's not a very good debate, to be fair, but
I can sort of tell by the lineup.
Yeah, but Aaron Bastani, of all people, you know, for where he operates within politics, actually did seem to have a pretty good grasp on how politics does actually function, though. And he himself was saying, like, you know, even something like leaving the ECHR, if that was actually something you wanted to do, would probably take up all the political capital of an entire 4-year cycle in politics, and you probably still wouldn't get it done by that point. So yeah, I mean, I've often said in the past that all you need to do is gain power, and then everything after that's kind of easy. But yeah, there is quite a lot more to it than that, and it is a laundry list of stuff.
I mean, to be fair, if you did get to the point where you had functionally, the delay.
I was just going to ask Adam, and when he says that, do you mean because of the opposition you would get from the civil service and the mainstream media, etc.?
Yeah, basically.
Where you were talking about leaving the ECHR. Yeah.
And NGOs and other such things. There was a situation, I think, a year ago. I keep thinking it was in Georgia, but I think I've got the country wrong, where they were trying to pass a bill that was surrounding like NGO funding transparency. And it caused an enormous amount of upset within their system. That also, a lot of that seemed to reside from outside of their system. So it is pretty shocking at times how so many different sort of disaggregated institutions can pull together and push in one direction. And that is kind of what you're up against ultimately. If people like us or of our inclination was to do literally anything.
I just think that one of the first things a right-wing government would have to do, they would have to really do a big pruning of the top guys in many civil service jobs. You know, the leaders of most civil service departments would need changing.
I think you probably have to do the same with the judiciary.
Do you not agree with it? I mean, that would be... Yeah, for sure.
Because so if you were going to do, I mean, you might even have to go further and do some full civil service reform. So you don't just, you know, remove a few talking heads and replace them with other people. Or that would obviously help. You might actually have to go through with a whole reform package just to try and get things, working in some, I don't know, working basically the way that it's advertised, at least for a short time, and hopefully get some people who are a bit more sympathetic to help along the way. But then you'd also have to do things like, as I just said, judicial reform as well. And I don't really know which of those you do first, because whichever one you don't do is going to be weaponized against you first to try and protect the other, probably. And then you'd have the media as well. So you probably have to hit all three of these more or less at the same time, if that's even feasible. And then just try to paralyze that portion of the system until you can actually reform it into a way that makes it useful, or at the very least neutral again.
Yeah, I mean, it is an enormous.
The Supreme Court to be removed.
That'd probably be the easier thing, to be fair. But like, for example, I know there's like an instance where there's an example that Curtis Yarvin brings up where he talks about the Stasi when Germany was unified, and he says they essentially just created new departments that took over those old responsibilities that were built in the functioning model of, you know, what the new unified Germany wanted them to be. And then the Stasi basically just had its doors shut and its people either made redundant or retired, you know, with protected state pensions. The thing is, though, is like it's all fair and good to point at that and say, yeah, that's a working example of how you can do it, and it is. But the amount, like you know, the size of the British state is so enormous. You know, you're talking about having to basically train up, you know, possibly hundreds of thousands of people in a new model of doing things, to replace all those institutions on any meaningful level. And some people talk about just changing the incentives, but I mean, a lot of people in these various institutions and societies kind of operate purely on ideological lines, or at least there's a very, very sizable chunk of them do, for all sorts of complicated reasons. It almost seems like if you change the incentives, it just wouldn't, that alone just wouldn't be enough.
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, the other thing as well, though, is that quite a lot of the civil service has currently, or a lot of government functions, or like a lot of the, especially lower level employees of the British state, are basically in make work schemes and don't actually have any, you know, functional purpose for being there. But that adds additional institutional strain that creates additional bloat that you then need to, you know, fill out with other bodies. So, you know, like quite a lot of that could probably be cut away, especially if you did things like, I don't know, reducing down the size of the tax code to like a, you know, a 5-page document rather than a 100,000-page document or whatever it is. And that immediately slashes quite a lot of HMRC, for example.
I retweeted I was retweeting a tweet today on X. It's 2.6 trillion pounds a year is the public sector tax bill in the UK at the moment. 2.6 trillion pounds a year. So you would have to have some sort of scheme which involved a lot of early retirement, and not only for department heads and deputy heads, but also for as a way of getting rid of a lot of this bloat for just some of the ordinary people.
That sounds like it's actually higher than the UK GDP, though.
I don't think it is. I'm not sure that that's true. Well, it's a Telegraph article, so I'm not sure if the Telegraph is a bad source, but they're suggesting that all public sector pensions are now 2.6 trillion a year.
I don't think that's
I'm sure
year,
that's like
that would
all
be
public sector pensions. So it's including. I think they're saying it's including things like the NHS, the military, as well as all the civil servants, etc., and presumably council employees and all that sort of thing as well. So I think it's just all public sector workers.
Yeah, I think that would be about 100% of GDP. So it doesn't quite sound right.
That's what they're suggesting anyway.
But I mean, it goes, a lot of this issue goes even beyond like pure public sector as well. Like there's that company that's building HS2, is it called Skanska or something? I mean, their job is to sort of tunnel out these lines for the HS2, and their report on tunneling is like 10 to 12 pages long, but their report on like diversity is, I think it's over 80 pages long, and features like a 10-page section where they go over the hundreds of thousands of pounds they've given to like charities that are dedicated to increasing the pensions of Bengalis living in I forget the area of London, but one of the more expensive areas of London. You know, just you know, all of these institutions as well, quite a few of which are private, who sort of, for various reasons, entirely depend on things like the 2010 Equalities Act being the way it is, or various other current British values, things that people went over the top for, you know, in the Somme, and according to probably various modern ministers. You know, all of that has to be cleaved out as well. I mean, in that instance, that's probably a bit easier because you can just shut those companies out of the UK market. But then, of course, they leave behind jobs and various other issues that you have to find a way of fitting into.
I know it's Count Duckegg in the chat, who's been checking up on this, is just saying that 2.6 trillion figure is correct.
Yeah, while he's following up on that, there is one other thing that I did want to say about the Stasi example earlier, actually, that you mentioned, Ataman. I think, for one thing, that story is not over, because what has become evident since then is that a lot of those people ended up then going into the you know, the NGO complex, and also obviously the East German Communist Party just morphed into was it the German Green Party?
Yeah.
So, you know, evidently that avenue is not perfect either, because those are still political actors, and, you know, in some cases you're probably just giving them a lot more money and a lot more time to operate in a way that is going to be compliant with the new regime. So they're just going to be able to rebuild their power base one way or another. And so, you know, potentially you'd have to look at other ways where you'd instead be able to disempower them and occupy them, so that they can't organize, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, this was a bit of a running conversation I had with a friend of mine.
You surely have to remove the Supreme Court. Sorry, you surely have to remove the Supreme Court and repeal the Equalities Act as two of your first things that you did.
Yeah, but again, once you do that, then you're going to face judicial challenges, especially from you know, human rights laws and things, whatever they can hit you with. The civil service is probably going to try and restrain you as best they can, based on you know, humanitarian concerns or ethical concerns, or like whatever they choose. And the media is going to give them a sympathetic ear the entire time and smear you all the way as like the next oncoming jackbooted thug regime.
Defunding the BBC would also have to be a top priority. I think that would have to be removing the license fee would have to be a very high priority.
You might even have to do something like complete overhaul of the. Sorry.
I actually can't remember where I was going with that original point I made anyway. But yeah, I mean, to be honest, we're at a point where you just have to shut the doors forcibly on the BBC.
Yep.
Or at the very least, recreate it.
I would say, like, removing the Supreme Court, that's going to help. Removing the Supreme Court is going to help, because first of all, it's not really part of the British Constitution anyway. It's an artificial Blair add-on. But also it's the method by which a lot of this stuff gets delayed and sometimes stopped. So if you remove that, that's going to make life a little bit easier. The media stuff you can make a bit easier by no longer funding the BBC, certainly from a license fee that people have to pay. You'd have to make people buy into the BBC if they want to do that, and not many will, relatively speaking. And then, as I say, you've got to remove most of the heads of the civil service and their deputies, and you've also got to have some sort of early retirement scheme for a lot of other public sector employees. I mean, looking at that figure of over $1 trillion just in NHS pension liabilities, you know, as they used to say that Prussia was an army that had a stake, and it's very true that Britain is an NHS that has a stake basically at the moment. It's just so ridiculous.
Well, actually, yeah, the pension point reminded me of what I was
NHS
saying. What I was saying before, which was that if you, I had this running conversation with someone where it was like, if you wanted to, let's say, walk into the Home Office after winning and say anyone that touched the grooming gang report is going to be fired under gross misconduct and therefore also losing their pension, is that a worse outcome? You know, is cornering them like that a worse outcome than just retiring them? But of course, if they are as ideologically driven as some of us believe, it probably is better off just to strip them of their pensions. And
yeah, you have to make sure that they don't have the power, time, or organizational capability to come back at you later.
Yeah,
and that as a starting point is actually a pretty good point. So you would need to try to start with measures which help you, but put them in a position where they have to defend the indefensible in order to be able to, you know, resist your reform efforts, and then you can use that as the thin end of the wedge.
Yeah, I mean, Viktor Orban Viktor Orban often has this point where he talks about how you have to actually have a state that actually works, like an economy that actually works for people to keep coming back and voting for you or supporting you or however it is you've gained your legitimacy. But I don't know. I do sometimes think, like, you know, if you were kind of honest with the British people, especially if they're knowingly going out there and voting for a what would be nominally an anti-immigration party, you could say globalist party and some such. If you came out and just said, for a while, for like 2 weeks, your pension applications aren't going to, your passport applications aren't going to work. You know, and some such. I wonder to what extent people would actually go along with that. If you know, you sort of forcibly imploding the British state is actually going to drive away all your bases of support, even if it's only a temporary thing.
I mean, for that kind of time span, though, if you're working within the democratic model, then you can work with that, because especially if you do it early, nobody's going to remember that in 4 years' time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you're honest with people, a lot of people would support you. I mean, I'm also thinking in things like the MOD and the Ministry of Defence, for example. It would be relatively easy to sack a lot of civil servants because of some of the decisions that have been made on defence spending, for example, and the vast amounts of money that have been wasted on it. I don't think that would be a difficulty. And I think if you explain that to the British people, they would put up with a certain amount of being buggered around for a while, so long as they thought that at the end of it, things are going to come out better.
But you'll have the media hounding them the whole time, basically trying to ensure that nobody does have the picture that it's going to be better. So you'd have to have, at the very least, some kind of like parallel method of communicating with the public in order to try to present an alternate view, because otherwise you're just going to have the media, I mean, more or less the same kind of thing as Liz Truss, really. I mean, it would obviously be turned up to not even 11, it would be turned up to 12. But there was that kind of sense in the Liz Truss situation that not only are things looking bad now, but there is no sign that they're going to improve. And those are relatively minor reforms by comparison.
Yeah, I mean, that was I was kind of, I mentioned this in the Discord just a couple of weeks ago.
The Treasury is going to be one of the places where you're going to have to do stuff.
Well, like the current
you're going to have to do stuff in the Treasury. This is for sure.
The current head of the Bank of England is a Fabian Society chairman. Just to point that out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. That was going to be my point, is that also the head of the Bank of England needs to be someone on your side if you can find somebody.
I don't actually know how Bank of England appointments work. I don't know if.
I mean, it would be a tremendous job to try and do it. But I mean, if it doesn't happen, then Britain is left in a situation whereby we don't have endless amounts of time to do something. You know, in 30 years, it's going to be too damn late, probably.
I don't know
if you guys agree with that.
I think you can. I think you can. I think you can reverse a lot worse situations than even what we'll be in 30 years. But obviously, the sooner the better.
Yeah, I mean, historically, certain peoples have gotten into situations.
It's going to be harder and harder to do.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, various peoples have gotten into situations that are almost immeasurably worse at various points and still managed to get out okay. But yeah, at a certain point, the outcome is going to be a lot more bleak past a certain threshold. So, for example, you'd be talking about the state functionally not collapsing, because but you know, you kind of reach South African levels of dysfunction, and then at that point, really, the only people who are staying around are those who can actually somehow get gives out of the state, rather than, you know, being like having the empty promise given to them, and who are able to tolerate being milked to the degree that the productive class in South Africa are. And you know, then beyond that, the people who actually have some kind of attachment to the land, and no one else who is just there for like an easy life or like a cushy job and some top up gibs. There's no reason for those people to be there anymore.
But that might be a good thing. That
well, exactly, but that's
be a good thing, Rupert. I mean, it might make some of the more recent arrivals bugger off again. You know, it might. So.
Yeah, demographically it would help, but that's also going to incur not only a lot of suffering amongst the, you know, the native population, but it's also going to drive away quite a lot of the people who can do better elsewhere as well, who don't have the same level of attachment to place, but are, you know, nonetheless English.
I mean, that's currently
people, and that's happening at the moment.
Yeah, because I mean, if you look at you know, if you're English now, you know, who's more likely to emigrate to Australia, or even if you're an engineer, you know, Dubai or somewhere like that, you know, it's going to be someone with a degree from the home counties rather than you know, someone with only a high school level of education from let's say the north or the southwest or somewhere. So yeah, it's like immigration actually, if anything, hemorrhages skilled labour from the country rather than the opposite for reasons that we don't have to get into now.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that, you know, what you guys are saying and what Rupert was saying is true. I mean, it would be very much clearing out the Augean stables. You know, it would be an absolute horror of a job to do, and enormous. But I mean, I think we're past tinkering around the edges with this stuff now. You know. You could also initially do things like, okay, we're gonna have zero immigration for the next 5 or 10 years. You know, a government could say, as a temporary measure, temporary in air quotes, we're gonna have net zero immigration for the next 5 or 10 years. And that of course is not going to turn things around on its own, but it would certainly stop them getting vastly worse every year because at the moment we're bringing in over 1 million legal immigrants every year.
But if you the thing is, if you do that, they're going to call you Hitler. So you kind of have to. I'm not saying you should.
Well,
you might as well
do that. I think they're going.
Yeah. I'm not saying you might as well be Hitler, but you know, you might as well take as hard line of a stance as you can feasibly get away with, and what you can feasibly get away with is what you can enforce.
Again, unless you can do something to work around the media at the same time as doing all the rest of this.
I mean, can you
I
even
think
build?
you've got to have like fireside chats to the public by the Prime Minister or whatever, you know.
Yeah, basically. Or another thing that I did think is that you could do a bit of a reform of the press licensing regulations. So you basically you don't grandfather anything in, and you just make everyone reapply for their license, and at the very least you can paralyze them for a little while in regulatory nonsense, and maybe even put some additional stipulations on how they do reporting and whatever. And if they refuse and they just try and be obstinate about it, then you can you just shut them down.
Yeah, I have sometimes wondered about the idea of just like bringing in full-blown journalism licenses.
Yeah, indeed.
Well, they already have to conform to
the
various
idea
regulations
these
and
days
whatever,
that
don't they?
there's
So.
any sort of and they're bringing in more all the time. They're bringing in more regulations on journalism all the time. It's just that the regulations they bring in at the moment suit the globalist cause.
Evola Sunglass in chat said, Braverman said it's easy to cut immigration. You don't need legislation. You just stop the Home Office issuing visas.
Yeah, there was a good thread that I saw related to this on Twitter/X again, which was basically talking about how the incentives are a little bit perverse in how they've been constructed. Going back to the incentives question, so maybe you can get it to work in some cases, but basically they are given a lot of hurdles to jump to actually be able to deny somebody an asylum application, I believe. To giving them like refugee status. They have to justify why they didn't, rather than justifying why they did. And they're given enough cases and essentially assigned enough quotas that not only is it easier to just stamp a blanket yes on almost everyone that comes across your desk, but in some cases that's probably just going to be entirely necessary to even do your job.
Yeah.
So you could do something as simple as flipping that,
with,
and instead,
with the illegal.
Instead making it a default no, then that would go a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. It needs to be the absolute exception when you're going to say yes. Like someone who's a genuine refugee, and there aren't many of those.
I mean
even that's gameable, but it helps.
Even the the acceptance rate under Tony Blair was significantly lower than it is now, so it's definitely something you could reduce, like within the current government structure.
But then the acceptance rate before that, under Major, was even less. So
yeah,
it just gets worse incrementally.
Yes. Yeah. Everything always gets worse. Absolutely. It would also mean, in terms of illegals, we could do my pet scheme of sending all British illegal immigrants to Ascension Island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Build a camp there, put barbed wire around it. You send some doctors and nurses and children's people and what have you there, and all of them get processed there, and 99% of them get sent back home.
Well, that was the idea with the Rwanda plan, but that's just been
once the illegal immigrants
paralyzed.
coming. Well, yeah, I know, but this would be far better than sending them to Rwanda and all this nonsense, which I've never thought was real, to be honest. I've always thought it was nonsense.
Well, I mean, this kind of goes into
if you send
another
them to
aspect of it.
British Island.
Because the problem with
if you send them to Ascension, it's a British island. It's not making agreements with other countries. It's still British. It's in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and I think 99% of those people traveling across from France, once they see they're going to get sent to Ascension and not to some three-star hotel in Britain somewhere, aren't going to stop coming. They'll stay in France.
But then you hit legal issues because they're still on British territory of some sort, so they can
to a camping on a South Atlantic island. Yeah, but
yeah.
It's exactly what Australia did with the boat problem that Australia had back in the day. And it stopped the boats immediately. As soon as they realized they weren't going to actually get to Australia at all, they stopped coming because there was no point.
But I don't think Australia was subject to the same requirements in terms of like international treaties and things, right?
I'm not sure, to be honest, because I just think if Britain sends them to a British territory, which is still run by the Brits, there's no native population there, so no one cares. It's just a military base, basically. If they're being sent to a British island, it means that, you know, the Court of Human Rights and all the rest of it can have very little say on it, because we're not sending them outside of British territory.
No, I'm not sure that's true, actually. I think that is where human rights law and international treaties can really kick in.
Rejected.
And that was the idea with the Rwanda plan, is because they never hit British territory, then there was more leeway and they weren't subject to the same legal appeals and the legal rights that can kick in from having them even reach your territory.
I mean, right, but I'll also say just quickly that a large reason behind why, I mean, I don't like the Rwanda plan for lots of different reasons. The numbers it tackles are minuscule and so on and so forth. But a large part of why that didn't work was also partly because the government trying to initiate the plan was also giving inordinate amounts of money to NGOs that were directly fighting the plan. You know, they were literally kind of funding their own sort of counter movement to that policy.
Yeah. So you got to really break again. Comes back to the problem. You got to. Sorry, you got to break all of this apart all at the same time, basically, because it's all into supporting. You know, it's like mutually supporting structures.
I just wanted to say to Sen of Sen's Fortress in the chat, this would not be a British Guantanamo. I am not suggesting that we send prisoners of war or terrorists there. I'm suggesting we send illegal immigrants there. And as I said, I'd send welfare people there, doctors and nurses, teachers, and all this kind of stuff. I'd make it as civilized as possible, but it would still be a camp they'd have to live in until their applications had been reviewed and in most cases rejected.
We
would absolutely have to.
That's cool. They wouldn't leave France, because you have to bear in mind. Yeah, by all means, but it wouldn't be anything like Guantanamo Bay. It wouldn't be for the holding of prisoners of war. It would be for the holding of illegal immigrants, basically, who are 99% economic migrants. They're not refugees or anything of that nature. Vast majority of them are simply economic migrants. And I just think given that they nearly all come from France, which is, you know, another safe country, relatively speaking, they're not going to do that if they're merely going to find themselves stuck on Ascension Island for somewhere between 6 months and 18 months.
Well, you've got to ban lawyers and journalists from getting there then,
stay in France. Yeah, you could, because it's a British military base. So you could absolutely stop journalists arriving there. Because you can say, yeah, it's a military base. Sorry, guys, you can't just go there. This is
then, regardless of what you're doing there,
it did when it had a similar problem.
And then, regardless of what you're doing there, it is going to be, you are going to have the accusation thrown at you that you basically set up British Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Rupert, you were saying? Well, they'll claim that, but it wouldn't be that, because you'd send nurses, doctors, teachers, social workers, and all these people there, and you'd have children's playgrounds. Not that you'd need them, because the vast majority of illegal immigrants are fighting age blokes anyway. Not many of them are women, and very few of them are children. So So I still think that would be the best solution for Britain with illegal immigration. Although, as people in our sphere constantly point out, illegal immigration is really a bit of a drop in the bucket compared to the 1 million+ people every single year that come in legally.
There's a comment in chat by Evola Sunglasses again. He says, does the panel blame some of this mess on all the neocon wars across the Middle East, which created 37 million refugees / migrants, Libya and Syria particularly? Funny enough, I came across I know this is something that some people have talked about already in our circles, but I came across this thing recently. It was by an army unit in America. I can't remember the actual name of it, but the ACCA Army Lessons Learned or something like that. The Center for Army Lessons Learned, that was it. And they produced this paper on migration as a weapon. And they talked. There was a couple of interesting examples they brought up. So they brought up the Soviet Union flooding Pakistan with Afghani refugees, or threatening to. And then the other example they brought up was Turkey threatening the EU with immigration and thus getting a massive payout out of it. They didn't bring up, let's say, Gaddafi or some of the other examples. But it is, on one hand, that's definitely I think there's definitely a part that plays generally against Europe more broadly. But I mean, this is an argument that Jeremy Corbyn brought up on Question Time, and has to many other people in that circle. But of course, if you actually look at the sort of migrants we get, even refugees, they're not actually from places that the neocons have actually been to, by and large. Whether you look at our legal immigration or illegal, it's often actually from almost everywhere else except some of those places. I think Iraq did get into the top 5 for origins of people on refugee status, but actually it's places like Iran, Pakistan, places like that often.
Yeah, to me, it's a purely rhetorical cudgel. It makes absolutely no difference what we may or may not have done in the past. It's literally just to make us accept something that, or just to make us shut up about our complaints, because we are supposed to have had some culpability into it due to not having voted or not even being alive for events that we didn't vote on and had no part in and actively opposed. It's completely ridiculous when you observe it at any degree of granularity, and you would never apply this kind of argument in most other cases. I would say it's just aggregated to the perfect level where they can just make something that sounds vaguely truthy. It's like a just so story, basically, to explain why there are so many people coming over the ocean. Never mind the fact that you could easily just stop them, and there's simply a choice not to.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've never understood why the British Border Force and what's left of the Royal Navy these days, and that's not very much. But I've never understood why the British Border Force and what's left of the Royal Navy have not been told simply to intercept these people in the Channel and land them back on the French coast again. Never understood that.
Because them coming here is a deliberate policy decision.
Came from is France, so send them back to France.
Yeah,
absolutely. I realise that, but I mean, if it was not, and if it really was a problem the British government had any intention of dealing with rather than something they actually want, that's what would happen. They would say to these people, yeah, by all means, you don't let them drown in the Channel, but you land them on the French coast, which is where they came from. And in actual fact, very few of those boats would get through with even a little bit of intention on the part of the government to actually stop them. You know, the Royal Navy has like quite a few fast patrol boats and stuff like this, which are relatively useless in warfare, but would be absolutely perfect for intercepting dinghies coming across the channel. You know, you don't need a warship to stop dinghies coming across the channel. A small patrol boat can do that.
A warship would be effective, though. It would send a message.
That's armed with a couple of machine guns. Well, just a small patrol boat armed with a couple of machine guns could easily intercept any of these dinghies coming across the channel. And then, you know, so long as their instructions were, and you can't blame what the people do who are actually on the boats, because obviously they're following orders. But if their instructions were, no, you land them on the French coast, and you intercept, then, you know, as you say, and that would require the British government to actually want to stop them, and they don't. That's the simple truth, is they have no intention of wanting to stop them.
Yeah.
I mean, also, if it genuinely was a matter of
the chat, an angry gammon with an air rifle would do the job. I'm sorry.
But yeah, I mean,
Rupert, carry on, mate.
That's fine. But if it actually was like a matter downstream of all of the you know, the wars that we took part in and whatever, and they are viewing us as enemy combatants, then why would we even, like, not only why would we want them to come here, but also why would they want to come here? Because if they view us as the enemy, then unless they are consciously doing it as part of an invasion, then, you know, if they think that we are, you know, bloodthirsty monsters who are just out to kill them, then why would they want to come here?
Yeah, it's the same as like with the karma argument. They, you know, they'll say with the karma situation, they'll be like, oh, you know, but actually, you know, we kind of deserve some aspect of what we got for, you know, this history of with whatever country it is, and it's like, right, but if they actually view it that way, why would you even give them a visa? You know, that's a complete self-defeating policy.
I mean, let's say, I don't know, just to take the example that everyone always goes for, like when like during World War II, when Poland was invaded by Germany, were there millions of Poles trying to flee into Germany? I don't believe there were.
No, quite. No, there were not. There was a fair number of Germans in Poland who were trying to do that, but obviously that was because they were Germans. But yeah. Mitch, did you have anything to say on this about what would need to be done if we suddenly, for some unknown reason, managed to get a based, actually patriotic British government?
Well, first of all, you can imagine we'd have to build up anti-air. Because, I mean, Nick Griffin once said, if we were to have a nationalist government tomorrow, the Americans would bomb us. So we'd need a shitload of anti-air weapons.
I don't think they would, to be honest.
No, I think the Americans actually would do it.
I don't think they would do that. No, I don't agree with that, mate. I think we might get some economic sanctions for sure, and we might get some from the EU as well. But I think that's as far as it would go. I don't think.
We'll just get the same treatment that Serbia got in the 90s. That's what happened to us. If we try to have some sort of nationalist government.
Honestly, I honestly don't believe that will be practical politics in America, to be honest with you.
The last few years kind of tells you that the elites can do whatever they want and the people won't do anything. I mean, they stole an election and people just let it happen. So I don't think American elites really care what American people think these days.
Yeah, they're not going to start a war with Britain, mate. I'm sorry. I just think that's not practical politics for the Americans.
Oh yeah, that was obviously the same people that would say,
it's
"Oh,
not.
America
It
would have
just-
stuck with us during the Suez Crisis," because America's not exactly a great ally over.
No, absolutely not. And I fully expect that what we would get would be economic sanctions for sure. I'd expect that.
Yeah,
I
we did
think
have
we
Serbia
would
first, and
actually
then we
expect
sent in the
most of
bombers.
us on the panel would expect that, and probably from the EU as well. But no one's going to try and fight Britain over this. It's not going to happen. It's not practical politics. It just isn't.
Same people who said that were the same sort of people who said, "Oh well, America would have stuck with us during the Suez Crisis." And look what happened there. Or look at Serbia as well. Look what happened to Serbia. They did sanctions. For
Yeah, but again, they did. Mitch, I'm one of those people who thinks that one of the mistakes that Eden made during the Suez Crisis was he should have actually called America's bluff. He should have said, "Okay, do it," but he didn't. He backed down. But I think he should have called America's bluff, and I think had he done that, the Americans would have had to have not done what they were claiming they were going to do. I don't think they would have in the end.
No, I think they would have couped our government at some point later.
Yeah, that's the other stage to bear in mind is that so they go from
they might have tried, yes.
Yeah, they'd go from sanctions to coup probably next. I can't think of anything else in the intervening stage, and then if that doesn't work, then they probably go to invasion, or first declaring you a persona non grata in as a nation, and then go for the invasion somewhere down the line, or encourage someone else to do it on their behalf. I know there was the libs used to talk about this a lot in regards to Iraq.
I don't see America starting a war with Britain. I really don't. I don't see America starting a war with Britain. I really don't.
Okay, and Rhodesian said that about Harold Wilson when he practically just screwed over Rhodesia. Okay, and it wasn't practical politics really for Harold Wilson and Maggie Thatcher.
But he wasn't willing. But he wasn't. Yeah, but Mitch. Yes, they did, Mitch. Absolutely, they did. But it's neither of them invaded, and the reason Wilson didn't invade is that the British military told him we can't rely on our men to fight them.
Yeah, that's back when a time when our military generals largely made up of aristocrats who actually had some connection to the land. Compared to the American military nowadays, no. Do you really think Mark Milley has some sort of special connection to us? No, he doesn't. He's practically just a party.
No. Nothing you say to me, Mitch. Nothing you say to me, Mitch, is going to convince me that anyone in the top jobs of the American military are any good. They're not. Or the top jobs of the British military, I might add, for the most part. But I don't think it's practical for America to start a war with Britain. I really don't. Apart from anything else, the Americans have got bigger problems than trying to do that at the moment.
Right, but the American top brass not being what they once were kind of leads to them being more impractical, surely.
It does, but I don't think this is going to happen. I think also Aubrey's making a quite good point that America is also hoping that they're going to end up with a less lefty government than they have at the moment.
Oh, is this Trump?
So, but although
was it the first step act?
None of us have any idea. Even if Trump was to win the next election, and let us remember that Trump, one of his policies is to try and pull American troops out of Europe. Yeah, he wants to distance America from NATO, and frankly, I think we should support that. But one of his issues is to distance America from Europe and NATO. All right, we don't know who's going to take over after Trump, but no one knows that, quite frankly. But I still think the idea that because Britain was stopping mass immigration,
right, but America
and was going to stop illegal immigration, and generally that is not going to cause America to start a war with Britain. I just don't think it is.
I think it's
not immediately, but
They've got bigger issues in America than that.
I mean, they had bigger issues in the 60s as well, but they were still working against their own allies who were doing things that they didn't like at that point as well.
What about like
yes, they were. Yes, they were.
The bombing of the Nord Stream 2, though. I mean, if that was done to, let's say, British infrastructure under a government that we would consider ours, ostensibly right wing, would that not be considerably more akin to an act of war rather than what it's actually currently viewed at, which is somewhere between a random accident and Russian action?
Like to think that the British Armed Forces would actually be able to stop a lot of that. I really do. In terms of like sabotage and this kind of stuff, I'd like to think the British Armed Forces could actually stop a lot of that. Because, one of the other things a based British government would have to do is to reverse a lot of the ridiculous policies in the British Armed Forces. The LGBTQ feminism nonsense would all have to go, and that stuff actually you could get rid of fairly quickly because it's right. But if you're skin deep in the British Armed Forces, to be honest,
if you're then kind of in a situation where the British military is on high alert to see off American sabotage, I mean, that is just a Cold War at that point, though, isn't it? Like, that's a situation that's probably as tense from our perspective as the actual Cold War was between those two powers.
Oh yeah, look, I mean, I think we would definitely, depending who was running America, of course, and what direction America was going in, and we don't know that at the moment because you're not talking about something that's going to happen tomorrow or even this year. But depending on who was actually running America at the time and the direction that country was going in, I would expect that we would get things like economic sanctions. And I think we'd get them from the EU as well. But on the other hand, one of the other things that I think a base British government would have to do is to actually complete Brexit rather than doing this Brino nonsense that we're in at the moment. I mean, I think there's a good argument that Britain should leave NATO, for example.
Yeah, that's kind of. I mean, that kind of goes into what we started talking about at the beginning.
If you do that, you've got to also. But also, if you do that, Adam, and you've also got to beef up the British Armed Forces. If you're going to do any of this stuff, you really do have to beef up the British Armed Forces because Britain, rather than being the puppy dog of America, the little poodle that follows along whatever America tells us to do, which is what we've mostly been since World War II, Britain would have to stand on our own 2 feet a bit. And that means the British Armed Forces would actually have to be larger than they are now.
I can just hear Mitch just typing up a storm over there. But
yeah, I can hear that too.
I mean, I do wonder about, like, even with Trump, though, do we actually, like, on one hand, I kind of hope that Trump at the very least, I mean, my basic hope is that for America at least is I kind of think because of the way the world has become shaped by technology, that it's always the dominating hegemon is always going to be America. Even when America collapses, I don't think it's going to stay collapsed for too long. And I kind of just want whatever American elite rises to be more to just be more friendly to Europe generally, to see it kind of as the original mother country, the original motherland. So obviously that American elite has to be more white and more you could say Gentile. But does
That's
Trump
possible,
think
yeah.
in those terms? Like I don't know. Like when he talks about the whole distancing us from NATO, he kind of seems to be doing it from more of an anti-European lens, which does make me worry slightly.
Well, I mean, the other thing about that, Adam, is that if America does withdraw from Europe, and I'd like them to be honest, largely, that means the Europeans, including Britain, have to spend quite a lot more money on defense. No choice, because Europe is not defensible by the Europeans at the moment at all. Now, all
You
right,
don't think so?
I'm one of those people who doesn't believe that Putin wants to attack the West at all. I don't think he does. But nobody knows who's going to replace him in Russia or what's going to be happening in 25 years' time in Europe. So if you have America withdrawing from Europe and NATO becoming weaker, it would mean all the European nations, and that would include Britain, would have to spend quite a lot more on defense than they do now, because a lot of Europeans like to slag off the Americans, but the Americans spend the money that we don't on
right,
defense.
but I mean, I don't know really enough about the Russian
reason why Britain has not been historically, Britain has not been as bad as most European nations in terms of not spending on defense, although that's not true now. But it used to be true that Britain did spend rather more. But it's not true now, which is why the British Armed Forces are in such a terrible state now, how weak they are and small. But the reason why European nations have been able to get away with spending vast amounts of money on welfare and not very much on defense is basically because they've relied entirely on the Americans. And this is just the truth. It really
no,
is.
I don't agree with that. No, it isn't. I like America's military force in Europe is largely an occupational force. It's not here to protect us from anyone.
Don't get me wrong. I'm not arguing why America does it. I'm not saying America does it because they're nice. But this is the fact that even at the height of the Cold War, not so much the British, and in fact, back then, not so much the Germans either, it has to be said, but almost everybody else was spending almost nothing on defense, relatively speaking. And the reason they were able to do that is because the Americans were spending so much. Now, I'm not saying the Americans were doing that because they were lovely people. They were doing it, obviously, partly because of the influence it gave them over all those European countries. Totally correct, Alman, and I'm not arguing with you. But if America withdraws from Europe, and most of us would like it to, then that means European nations will have to spend twice what they're spending now on defense,
you've said that, but I don't buy that. Let's assume that the threat is Russia, right? Which neither of us believe, but let's just, for argument's sake,
not right now, no,
right? Surely, I mean, I don't know much about Russian army strength, but surely, like the combined arms of France and Britain, along with whichever region it happened to be, probably just Eastern Europe generally, and the various powers there, could absolutely hold Russia at bay fairly easily.
No, not true, mate. No, not true. The entire British Army fits inside Wembley Stadium with a load of seats to spare, mate.
But we're not talking about just the British
Army.
Army.
Wembley Stadium. That's kind of the thing. Every single man and woman in the British Armed Forces, in the British Army, in Wembley Stadium, and a lot of it will still be empty.
Well, even just getting away from Britain, I think it's possible to.
The Germans are not much better off. The French are not much better off either. None of the European countries are much better off, and many, in terms of like the smaller countries like Belgium and Holland and Denmark, etc., have ridiculously tiny armed forces.
I think it's possible to underestimate the extent to which.
Yeah.
That basically all of NATO has ploughed like quite a lot of resources and probably a lot more manpower than they're willing to talk about publicly into the war. And so I think for all intents and purposes, Russia has been fighting a much greater percentage of NATO's total power than almost anyone is talking about currently, if only through material alone. If the rest of NATO were to wade into the war now, then they wouldn't have anything left, really. Not that much anyway, in terms of equipment.
Yeah, look, people have got to be clear on this, because I've watched this on social media and in the mainstream media, and it's just rubbish. The NATO European nations have given the Ukrainians most of their ammunition reserves, and if you have no ammunition reserves, you can't fire. Simple as that. And they've also given them a very high proportion of their weapons. Denmark, for example, gave the Ukrainians all of their artillery. Denmark now has no artillery at all. No guns. So basically, the Danish army can't fight on their own. Can't fight at all, because an army with no artillery just can't fight. Simple.
But who would they be fighting, though?
It's ridiculous. Well, if you're going to talk about European collective defense, and you're going to have a European version, let's say, of NATO, then you've got to have a European defense where all of those countries can fight together. I mean, this is what you were just saying, Alan, right? But as it stands at the moment, Britain, Germany, and France together could not come up with a quarter of the Russian forces that are just.
Hang on, I just googled that though. That's not true. I literally just googled the differences in pure active personnel.
Go on, then. Tell me what
the various
you
forces. I googled exactly this: the active personnel sizes for Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Poland, and Russia.
Oh, you're adding Poland into it, are you? Okay, fair enough.
Well, I wasn't adding Poland in. I was trying to see what combination of those countries.
Easily the largest army out of those people. Poland has easily the largest army out of those people, but it's got a lot of very out of date equipment.
It was the second largest, but it was right up there. Yeah.
You've also got to look at something else. I mean, a lot of the forces in Britain and France and Germany, right? Not so much in Poland, but in Britain, France, and Germany, a hell of a lot of those forces are not frontline troops.
That's going to be the same for basically any other forces.
They're not guys who man tanks. They're not right. No, well, you say that, but it's higher in advanced Western armies than it is anywhere else. It's even higher than the Russians.
Yeah, because they're designed more for force projection. So what the Americans used to call
rear echelon motherfuckers. I'm trying to point out that what the Americans used to call rear echelon motherfuckers, which is the guys who do the supplies and all the rest of it, all very vital and what have you, but they're vastly bigger in advanced Western armies like Britain, France, and Germany than they are even in Russia, let alone other countries. So don't look at the overall size of the armed forces and think, oh, well, that's a fair judgment. It's not. You've got to look at the actual fighting part of the forces, the TFARMs.
Well, no, because
so if you're talking about an army, well, if you're talking about an army, the only TFARMs are the infantry, the armor, which is the tanks, the artillery, and the engineers. Nobody else. So you get rid of everybody else when you're saying, well, what can fight?
Right, but logistics is like the penultimate part of the military.
Just doing supplies. Listen,
but that's you need supplies though.
Vital, it is, but the proportion of logistics. I don't want to turn this into a military history stream or a modern military stream. I'll happily do one of those if someone wants to, but I reckon we're going to bore shitless a lot of people if we go on to about it now. But
well, there is a political
say,
angle as well, quickly though, because I mean you're entirely right.
Hang on just 1 minute, please, Rupert. The British Army can put a brigade in the field at most, and maybe after about 6 months we could put 2 brigades in the field. The French might be able to put a small division in the field after about 6 months, and the Germans would be something similar. These are tiny forces, right? The Ukrainians, in their completely failed summer offensive last year, completely had destroyed at least 15 new brigades. And a division is 2 or sometimes 3 brigades. And they had 15 totally destroyed, at least 15. It was probably 18, actually. The Western countries, and particularly the Western European countries, have no bloody forces whatsoever. I mean, the British Army is so small now, I'm not entirely sure what use it's supposed to be honest, other than for home defense.
Which is all it needs to be.
So I'm sorry, and honestly, this is one thing I follow very closely and I do know about.
No, you're still wrong, though. So what were you going to say, Rupert?
I was just going to say, in a sane country, you would be entirely correct that, you know, just having a lot of admin and backline staff doesn't necessarily mean that you're, you know, if anything, it might be increasing the efficiency of any frontline troops that you might want to deploy. But the problem is that because of the post-Cold War attitude of, you know, history's over and everything, and maybe it's been going this way for longer in America, but a lot of militaries, it seems, have basically just taken on a kind of I don't know, almost like a make work scheme with funding that comes from a different pot. So you can just, you know, reduce down the unemployment numbers, especially in the case of the US, and maybe you can funnel money to groups that you know, you can basically just make some money out of it for various different sections of the economy that you want to be supporting without officially doing so. And you know, all these different like little tricks that have been used to you know, divert the purpose of the military away from what it in theory is supposed to be, and that kind of comes across in part in the amount of backline staff, which, you know, in practice they also don't serve a military function if you were to go to war.
True. Very true. I mean,
you know, like you can look at the countries
where we were for the best part of 20 years. We couldn't keep a brigade group there fully staffed. One brigade group, 3 battalions basically, with a bit of armor. And the Americans actually had to come into Helmand province, where the British Army was, and send loads of US Marines in there because we didn't have enough soldiers to control it. And the British Army could find no way of sending enough soldiers over there to control it. And the British Army was actually bigger then than it is now.
Sure, but we're not talking about just the British Army, though.
No, we couldn't do the... Well, we are really, especially if we were to be talking about a based British government that was going to break away from the globalist system, stop mass immigration.
You were just talking
do you
about
reckon we'd be
defense.
big pals with the EU? Because I doubt it.
No, you were just talking about Europe being dependent on America for defense. That's what spawned this particular argument.
Yeah, no, but I'm thinking on the basis that, you know, if that happens, and you're going to get a based British government, which is going to try and distance itself, shall we say, from the globalist system. That's what I was looking at this on the basis of.
Well, no, but even if you did, like, because of where the funding is, like at rock bottom, basically, it wouldn't take much to massively increase the capabilities of the current standing army anyway, in the grander scheme of things. But it's just.
Oh no, look, you could, yes, you could definitely improve, yes.
But I'm also just saying that if we're purely talking about the defense of Europe, it would, like, in place of American forces, it wouldn't even really need that. Anyone that would pose a risk to us, you know, you're talking about the combined arms of some 30 nations. You know, and it's okay, yeah, a lot of those nations,
most of whom
are a shadow of their former self.
Most of whom can hardly provide a battalion.
It doesn't matter. It's still the combined forces of 30 nations, and you know those 30 nations. A lot
of those nations, Adam, can barely provide a battalion.
It doesn't matter. It's the combined force of 30 nations. It like you can just the numbers alone.
Yeah, which is going to be vastly inefficient because of all the different languages and.
Maybe they will.
Yeah, they're not.
The combined.
The numbers
you say
are
that
not.
You say that as well. No one outside of Anglosphere speaks English. But that's why NATO will probably operate largely on English. Whether you're Estonian, Polish, Romanian, German, French, whatever, everyone will operate based on English. So the idea of a language issue is going to be a big problem. It's not really.
No, but
I mean, how do you think NATO does
with that stuff, right? What used to happen in NATO? Yeah, look, I'm not saying this isn't solvable, because if you look at the Western armed forces at the height of the Cold War in, say, 1985, they were vastly bigger than they are now. I mean, today, the British Army has about 250 main battle tanks, yeah, only of which about 100 are fully operational and we have crews for. So 250, but that includes reserves, yeah? In 1985, the British Army had 1,100 main battle tanks. I noticed someone in the chat said, could we do the Falklands War now? Well, let's give you another example there. At the time of the Falklands War, Britain, the Royal Navy, had over 70 destroyers and frigates. 70. Today, we have 16, and it might actually be 15 at the moment.
Okay, but we're not talking about
in 1982, Britain had about a dozen. But hang on, in 1982, Britain had about a dozen nuclear-powered hunter-killer submarines. You know, they're powered by nuclear power, but they're conventional submarines with torpedoes, etc. We had about a dozen of those then. We've got 6 today.
Yeah, and if you're going off Australia, I mean, they're going to get shafted by this
1985. The RAF in 1985 had over 250 combat aircraft. Today, the RAF has barely 80 combat aircraft.
But this is the thing, Rob. I mean, even with America, like, they're like the strong arm of the system, and even they're suffering logistical issues. Like, they can't even produce enough submarines for their own navy, let alone for the Australians, who they did a deal with a few years back.
100%.
So,
yep.
It's one of those things where...
And they're also struggling with recruitment, just as the British are. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the thing, Robo, isn't it? I mean...
The Americans are also struggling with recruitment, just as the British are.
Yeah, but that's the thing, Robo, isn't it? I mean, let's say, for argument's sake, like a nationalist Britain were to surface. I mean, the thing is, if the Americans and EU were to isolate us, I mean, sure, yeah, we could get buddies quickly with, let's say, I don't know, for argument's sake, geopolitically with China and Russia. But do you think that would be enough to ward off economic pressure from the EU and America?
Well, I wouldn't be in favour of becoming allies with China anyway, but that's just me. But yeah.
Well, that's the thing. If you're going to want to decouple from a globalist,
I don't think China would do Britain much good.
Okay, well, you haven't got much choice in the matter, though, because you're wanting to decouple from America and the EU. You're going to have to buddy up with Russia and China to make up for that, because you can't go.
I think what you might do economically is different. I think what you might do economically is different from what you might do militarily. But anyway.
No, it's not just that. I mean, militarily, I mean, if America and the EU were to collaborate together and bomb us or invade us, we're screwed because we'd have a naval blockade to deal with. Our armed forces won't be strong enough to deal with the rest of NATO ganging up on us. And I don't think Russia and China are going to stick out their necks for us. So
no, nor do I. But I mean, that's another reason why you wouldn't ally with those nations, at least, because why would you want everyone to gang up on you? You wouldn't.
Well, as I said, that's the main problem, though, isn't it? Well, that's the problem, though, isn't it? The Americans will have NATO gang up on us if we were to have a nationalist government and break the mold. That's what would happen. So you're going to have to be pragmatic.
I think economically, look, we're going around in circles a bit here because my own opinion is that, and I think Rupert had it right, is that initially what would happen is you would almost definitely get some sort of economic sanctions, depending what sort of governments are in America and Europe at that time. Okay, but you're very likely to get some sort of economic sanctions. Could you get some sort of CIA color coup type stuff happening? Yeah, that's conceivable too. What I don't think is conceivable at all is any sort of hot war. Don't think that's going to happen.
No, I think because
I don't think that's practical.
I just think you're very naive about America, about how bad their elites are. I think that's a main issue, because I mean,
as I said, I don't think we know who would be in charge of America at that time anyway.
Someone who's a full-on.
But I just think.
I mean,
this is possible, but it's also possible that America might take a different course too.
Yeah, I'm going to press exit date on that. I think America's. I think America's
some of our
too fortified.
Friends might get into power in America. Who knows?
I'm pressing exit date on that big time. You'd have to have America break up. It's into like, I don't know, like Dixie, California, Midwest breaking off, etc. Because it's like America is like the inverse of the Soviet Union these days. In that, instead of being they enforce like a sort of gay race communism with every main. It's like for communism to fall, you have to have Gorbachev in charge and dismantle everything, pretty much. Do you think someone like that will materialize in America? No, I don't. So, unless America were to break up, like collapse I don't think Britain's going to get a base patriotic government either. But we're talking in hypotheticals here, aren't we? Yeah, but you're talking hypothetical where America's government might well just
August's point was hypothetical.
Yeah, but it's also just based on the one variable. So you can't make assumptions about anything else, because you could also once you start going down that route, you can say, okay, well, what if we already have a sympathetic elite class and a sympathetic media class, and it just kind of makes it makes everything easier. But if you only have the one node, then I think that's a more useful way of looking at the question.
Yeah, look, I think it's an interesting point, and I think you, Rupert, and Adam made some good points about practical things that would need to be done. But I think that it's a big leap to go from that to America's going to bomb us, which I don't think is very likely, to be honest.
I mean, as Steve said in chat,
even a Biden government, I don't think would do that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, as Steve said, America losing Britain would be like losing a queen in chess. Yeah, because as bad as our country is, we are a very big geopolitical player in terms of a Western system. So if they were to lose us,
yes,
that's a big hit.
Yeah.
I really don't think America's going to be complacent and go, oh, well, I guess we just have to accept it. No, they'll do something like sanctions, possible coup. If a coup doesn't work, I mean, because you take Viktor Orban in Hungary, he's pretty much just what the institutions like anyone who's prone to try and overthrow him, he's largely just swept the institutions and made them all loyal to him. So Viktor Orban won't, for example, get couped anytime soon, and the elections are fortified in his favour.
No.
So what chances are there for someone like Viktor Orban to get removed? It's not just that. I mean, you also got a factor that, you know, it's like similar to Japan in the sense that the language is so different to English.
Yeah, and to be fair, Mitch, and to be fair, Hungary is a weaker nation than Britain is. All right. Let's be fair about this. I mean, you know, I'm appalled at how weak the British armed forces are, but they're still more powerful than Hungary's. You know.
Okay, and you look at this recent Ukraine war, you still see Hungary having some relevance in that area with Ukraine. So there is some relevance to be had with Hungary. And let's face it, if one country rebels, I mean, what's to stop other countries from rebelling? I mean, Poland doesn't rebel anymore, but that's because that's what Poland's like. They have, I mean, they'll kick Hungary under the bus on the altar of hating Russia. So that's Poland dealt with. But Hungary's got more pragmatic lens upon it all. I can imagine, like, I mean, you've also got lately protests in Hungary over some corruption thing or something. You won't be surprised if, like, because I mean, you also got the American ambassador to Hungary, some guy called David Pressman, who interested in the life section, and also he's a homosexual. You can imagine the Americans look to be going in hard on Hungary. They're trying to get up the place as best they can. I mean, Hungary's got some things which help them. Like, for example, their language is so, like, it's so foreign, for one of a better term, because it's not even European. So it's not exactly like you're going to see American CIA learning Hungarian fluently to a point of native. I mean, Americans don't develop for bloody Russian anymore, like they did with Cold War. So there's that. And as I said, Viktor Orban has just pretty much swept all the institutions in his favour.
Mitch, I agree with you about Hungary, and if Hungary can survive, there isn't any reason why a more based Britain couldn't as well. But also, I mean, you know, you could have a Le Pen government in France, and all right, Le Pen's cut to some degree, but she would be much less anti-Britain stopping immigration than the current French president. You could have Wilders in Holland, you know, and like I say, we don't know who's going to be running America when this hypothetical did or didn't happen, you know. So but I think the idea that, you know, Britain stopping mass immigration and even doing some sort of repatriation scheme, the idea that this would lead to the Americans militarily attacking Britain is just pie in the sky. It's not going to happen. You know, lefties might think it would, but it won't. You know,
I think it functions in basically the same
even
way
if that was, you know, America's got much bigger problems than that. For one thing, you know, China is a much bigger deal for the Americans than Britain stopping mass immigration would be.
Yeah, look, right, you take China, right? So, okay, Australia, their nuclear submarine capability has been hampered by America screwing up the deal. South Korea, their birth rate is 0.64. But, I mean, you'd think that, you know, the Americans would make sure, like, the American globalists would go, okay, well, there are some countries we can insert liberalism into, but the periphery nations are close to our rivals. We don't do it too bad. Like Japan, for example, doesn't have as bad a liberalism as, say, Britain does, but that's because Japanese language is quite, I mean, they use a different script. Japanese people are quite different to Americans, so it's harder to subvert Japan compared to Britain. They're still getting subverted, just at a slower pace. South Korea, on the other hand, they're pretty bad. Like their birth rate is at 0.64. But at a point, there's going to be a situation where America has to beef up their military presence in South Korea. That can help to, like, burden the empire. But it's also, well, why is it that American liberalism, that, like, America just kind of allowed South Korea to get so bad in some ways. Like if you believe that, America, if you believe, for example, South Korea is a puppet of America, depending on your perspective. So it's not just that. I mean, there are far more American elites who are more gung-ho about Ukraine because of, the ethnic vendettas about the Russian Empire and so on. Whereas with Taiwan, it's just there's not that emotional angle to it. It's just just geopolitical rivalry between America and China. But there's no emotional importance among American elites for Taiwan in the same way there is for Ukraine.
Yeah, Mitch, I see what you're saying, but honestly, American geopolitical priorities are much more China than they are Ukraine. Honest, and you can even see it.
Yeah,
with
that
opposite. Victoria Nuland chick being got rid of. No, Victoria Nuland's just been got rid of. There's not a lot of American aid arriving in Ukraine these days, mate. And it's the Europeans who are getting more worried about this than the Americans are.
Okay, but that's because
the Americans
can
take the loss in Ukraine. They can't.
They're not doing it over Taiwan, but they're doing it because there's inter-elite rivalry over like the border and all this stuff. They're not. You don't see the State Department going and saying we need to give more weapons to Taiwan. They're not doing it. If they're doing so, then they must be doing it very
well. They have been giving. They have, Mitch. They have been giving more weapons to Taiwan. They've even got American special forces on Taiwanese islands now. So yeah, they have been. And they have been.
You've got American special forces. Okay, and you've got American, Polish. You've also got. I mean, Schultz even said, "Oh yeah, there are, was it French and British crews operating, of course, British and French-made gear within Ukraine." You can imagine also American.
Sure there are. Yeah, I'm sure there are
NATO-level staff working within Ukraine.
Of course there are. There are Western special forces in Ukraine. Yes, there are.
Yeah, so
absolutely, there are certainly British and American special forces in Ukraine. Yes.
Yeah, but that's my overarching point. Well, is like you look at the American rhetoric. They've got much stronger rhetoric about Russia. I mean, lately, right? Okay, the Americans have talked more about this terror attack in Moscow, saying, "Oh well, Russia cannot blame Ukraine." When's the last time we've heard the State Department say anything about Taiwan openly? Not for a long while. It's just taking a back burner compared to Ukraine.
Yeah,
and the American elites.
Mitch, I'm not arguing what the Biden regime talks about or anything like that. But in the longer term, the geopolitical problem for America, which bear in mind, America is a Pacific power with a Pacific coast. The bigger problem for America in the longer term is absolutely China, not Russia. It is.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're actually going to act on that.
I'm somebody who thinks that the Russians. Well, I'd be amazed if they didn't, to be honest with you. Well, I really would, because if they don't, then they're going to lose. They're going to lose their other allies in that part of the world, and most importantly, Japan, as Mitch was saying, South Korea, Australia. They will lose those allies if they don't. Put it that way.
They might well, but this is a question of how the questions are even. Well, how policy like this is even resolved, and I don't think it's done rationally according to the national interest. I think it's just according to whatever domestic political issues are on the mind of whoever's in the position to make the decision.
That may be true, and this is an election year in America. Yeah, and it's an election year in America, of course. And who knows who's going to win, because not only who is going to vote, but what sort of fortification will go on, etc., etc. And we can't know that.
So, for example,
but this is a very geopolitical discussion.
Yeah, an incident that I came across recently, which is that after the Monica Lewinsky scandal, Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton weren't talking, and the only thing that got Hillary Clinton to start talking to Bill again was when she called him to basically state that he really needs to, or to basically state in the strongest possible terms that he needs to intervene in Serbia. So we have a situation where potentially one of the big events of the 20th, 21st century foreign policy was basically just decided by a guy trying to fix his marriage.
Yeah,
hardly rational policy.
Fair enough. Look, can I just say, Richard Phillips makes a very good point in the chat. He says Britain would matter a lot more to the USA if they couldn't just assume we do whatever they want. At the moment, we have zero leverage because we are the USA's battered wife. Now, I actually think that Richard Phillips makes a very good point there. And one of the things I would do if I had anything to do with a based, really patriotic British government is I would build up the Royal Navy, and I would do it in such a way that whilst we couldn't possibly be a bigger navy than America or China, right? But we certainly could build up the Royal Navy to a large enough size that it would be enough to make the difference between those two navies. And then you would have, this is another reason why I don't think you would have America, by the way, bombing Britain or invading Britain and all this sort of nonsense. I would actually make the Royal Navy something that the Americans and the Chinese wanted as an ally, because it would be big enough to actually make the difference who would win a naval war. And any war between America and China is going to be mainly a naval war, be a naval air-sea war. And I would build up the Royal Navy so that it would be big enough to make the difference.
Do we actually have to be allies with any of these people?
Would have much more influence. Sorry?
Do we actually have to be allies with any of these people?
I'm not saying we would be allies to the... Yeah, we probably do. In a real world, Adam, yeah, we probably do. But we don't necessarily need to be totally tied in allies. We can be people who will ally with powers that are doing things that we want. A bit like, this stream is called Splendid Isolation. And the reason it's called Splendid Isolation is it's based on Britain in the latter part of the 19th century, when Britain basically kept a large enough navy that we didn't need alliances. But everyone wanted Britain as an ally because we had the most powerful navy in the world. Now, Britain can't do that anymore. We're not big enough now. We got rid of the empire. But what Britain could do is we could have a large enough Royal Navy that other nations would want Britain as an ally. And if you want a country as an ally, you don't invade it. You don't even put sanctions on it. And that's that would be my position, is I would want the British Armed Forces generally, but particularly the Royal Navy, I would want to be large enough that when they're thrown into the balance, they will tip that balance to the side they join.
Okay, but your assessment of America,
and that would give
you're just
really
thinking that the American elites are rational, like they're not, though. I mean, as Rupert said, the Kosovo.
Look, I don't even know who the American elite will be at this stage. Look, I don't know.
Do you see the American elites changing anytime soon, or are they just being even crapper than they are now?
I hope so.
Okay,
I hope the British ones will too.
Yeah, I'm going to press X today for what? I don't think in the next 10 years, for example, anything's going to massively change. For example,
you can do that. We are going to change this subject anyway. Look, I is saying, aren't navies less important now because missiles are so deadly? Blah blah blah. This is all I'm going to have to do an armed forces stream to talk about this stuff. This is not the place to do it because that's.
It doesn't.
True.
It doesn't take that much explanation, though, does it? All we need
at least not in the way you think it is.
The only way I've ever explained it to people is that the probably the easiest way of thinking about it is that the Royal Navy
have to track
is
them
like
in real time. Your missiles have to be totally accurate. Do carry on, Alman, please.
Well, I was just going to say that there's quite a delay we've got now, I think. But I think the best way of people to articulate it is to just think of the Royal Navy as a launch pad for various operations. You know, if you look at the Libya campaign, which obviously I didn't want that to happen, but either way, you know, for RAF jets to fly over Libya, because we didn't have an aircraft carrier, they had to fly them from Italy, which like tripled the cost. Compared to just running them off of an aircraft carrier that we could build and run. And that's just one small aspect of it. I mean, the ships themselves now often act as missile launch platforms, as well as ways to deploy, you know, troops, Royal Marines, and various other groups.
All of them do, yes.
So that's a pretty
warships are carrying missiles, yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty simplistic way of viewing it, but that's like the on the most simplistic end, the way of understanding why a navy is important today, probably more so than other certain points of history.
Yeah, look, navies are basically how you project power around the world. You can't do it without a navy, and the Air Force can't do it. They can't project power around the world. They can do certain things, but only certain things. And as everyone ought to know by now, Air Forces cannot win wars on their own. You know, everyone's going on about drones, etc., in Ukraine. And yeah, absolutely, drones have changed everything for the moment. But I guarantee you, within 5 to 10 years, there will be anti-drone technologies that come up that will make them nowhere near as effective as they are now. They'll still be important, but they won't be as effective as they are in Ukraine at the moment. You know,
on that
that's
note,
just going to happen. But I honestly, I think
I am going to have to get off. So I'll have to talk to you later.
I was just going to ask you if you had a first subject, Adam, but no worries.
It's almost 2 hours in, but no, I didn't have a first subject anyway. I'm subjectless. So that was
all right,
probably for the
no
best.
worries. Thank you for joining as always.
All right, yep. Talk to you later.
Good to speak to you again. Bye.
Thank you for joining as always. Anyway, I don't know what's happening. All right, I don't know if that's any better. Yeah, no, I deliberately went out because I don't know what's happening with this delay. Mitch, did you have a first subject you wanted to bring up?
I was gonna bring up like stuff like AUKUS and South Korea, but I've already brought them up, so I can't think of. I don't know. I mean, I'm looking at this story about the whole the terrorists that attacked Moscow, they were paid in crypto, and I'm thinking, yeah, this is where I'm starting to get skeptical about the Russian story, about what's going on, because if you're going to pay a bunch of people to shoot up a concert full of people, you'd pay so in cash, not have an online trail that's traceable to whoever had the money to pay them. Yeah. So you get some people who reckon that, oh, well, these just there were certain bits of the Russian story about all this that just aren't adding up to my mind. Namely the money.
Is there anything else, or is it just the money at the moment?
Yeah, I don't know.
So it's mainly the money. I mean, what other? I mean, the only other like stuff I've seen where people are trying to be skeptical about it is, you know, all the NAFO tards trying to say, oh, well, these guys are blue shirts or whatever, and it's just pie in the sky sort of stuff. Please, like, that's the only thing that I'm thinking of where, okay, if you're going to pay terrorist, you do so in cash, you wouldn't do so with online trail, where all you have to do, has to happen is FSB take their computers and then they can just trace the money trail, as opposed to how you normally do it, where you do so in cash.
Well, to be fair, with all the cameras and things around, then even doing so in person wouldn't necessarily be ideal, because then you could look for sightings and things to to work with this person.
Much harder than it used to be. Yeah, that stuff's become much harder than it used to be. You know, all the you read about classic Cold War espionage and what have you, and dead letter drops and all this kind of stuff. Much more difficult to do today than it would have been back then.
Well, I mean, it's like the SBU, for example. They've been known to bring like smuggle people in, like the ones who killed off Daria Dugina and like Vladlen Tatarsky a while back. So the SBU have formed to be able to infiltrate people and sort of evade Russian authorities in that way. I mean, it's like Moscow has a lot of cameras.
I don't know. I mean, look, obviously, these terrorists are obviously not very bright. All right, you can see that they're not the brightest tools in the shed. But you know, it's never been the case that intelligence agencies won't use morons to do what they want to be done. Never been the case. They'll happily use morons. In fact, they're probably easier to use, you know?
Yeah, but so you get some people on the more pro-Ukraine right-wingers that say, oh, well, these are just like 4 random churkers that the FSB just randomly got. And it's like, okay, I mean, for one, right, I mean, the churka problem in Russia is kind of like the problem with the Pakistanis over here, where so you got these 4 guys driving in one automobile in Bryansk Oblast in the middle of nowhere, and they get apprehended. Now, what reason have 4 guys got to drive through the Russian countryside far away from where any of them work? So that's why I don't really have any skepticism regarding the suspects themselves. I reckon they are guilty, and I hope they receive the appropriate punishment that way. I won't say any more on that.
Yeah, they're just moronic thugs. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I mean, like Morgoth said last week, they're moronic thugs who just did it for a little bit of money. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's one end. I mean, it's not just that. I mean, some people reckon it's a false flag, and I go, okay, if it was a false flag, he would have gotten a bunch of moron Ukrainian POWs rather to do the shooting rather than as if like 4 churkers, because as I said, Russia's got a bit of a problem where a lot of businesses lobby to use like cheap labor from Central Asia. Now, some people reckon the Orthodox Church actually released some sort of memorandum or something today where they're petitioning Putin to go, let's stop allowing so many Central Asian cheap laborers. So we could see that aspect of Russia change, because I mean the Orthodox Church has quite an elite position in terms of the Russian halls of power. But for the time being, yeah, like plenty of churkers, and you know, Putin, you know, he's one guy. One of the main focuses is suppressing any sort of ethnic trouble akin to what happened with the Soviet Union in the later days. So the idea that this is a false flag.
I just think you're right, Mitch. Mitch, I think you're right. I mean, if Putin was doing this and his regime were doing this as a false flag, you would have had half a dozen escaped as of POWs doing it, wouldn't you? Because then you could turn around and say, see, Ukrainian Nazis, this kind of stuff, you know?
Yeah, I don't know if you saw... another thing that drew my attention was I don't know if Rupert's seen this, but this whole ISIS K stuff that's forming up, which I'm just immediately skeptical of, because for one, so ISIS apparently are now pivoting from the Middle East, where they got the arses handed to them by Russian Air Force and Assad and so on. Now they're pivoting towards Central Asia, and they're creating memorandums caring about the Uyghurs of Xinjiang province in China. Now, the Uyghur people, no one cares about them. No one in the Muslim world cares about them. All of a sudden, this ISIS group cares for them. All of a sudden, out of the blue. And it's not just that, they're pivoting now to go up against Russia and China, who just happen to be the enemies of America. Who, I mean, in the case of China, I mean, they haven't really done anything to irk off the Muslim world as well. So I just don't see, as I say, like this ISIS case stuff. I reckon it's, I mean, you get those people with ISIS insignias working on the Ukrainian side. So I'm just of his opinion that ISIS-K, yeah, I have a feeling they're just either American proxy or they've just been compromised and they're just an unwilling asset on behalf of the CIA or some ilk of that sort.
It's possible. I definitely don't rule it out, but it is worth pointing out that this didn't exactly come out of nowhere. So there was more talk about them back when, towards the end of Afghanistan, because they were working alongside Afghanistan, and there was a lot of talk since then about the fact that they've gone from cooperating with the Taliban to now fighting them in a kind of like insurgency campaign. And so I think some people were at the time floating the idea of actually helping them out, even though, obviously they are even more radical than the Taliban, and that's kind of why they're in conflict at the moment. So judging by the fact that we know that ISIS tend to get quite a lot of momentum behind them. So when they're doing well, they grow exponentially faster, both due to additional funding opportunities that allows them to hire more mercenaries, or due to people wanting to just be on board for a winning thing. Everyone likes being on the winning side. It is believable in that sense that ISIS-K would be the one part of ISIS that is kind of still having some relative success. But
yeah,
how you combine that with everything else is a bit more open.
Yeah, I've heard so just as like the 4 attackers involved in
ISIS-K also attack a lot of American enemies, apparently.
Yeah, they're pivoting now towards attacking
I was
the
just
Russians
going
and the Chinese.
Say ISIS-K seem to attack a lot of American enemies.
Yeah, I think I could be wrong about this.
I've got a little bit of F to doubt on that one.
Yeah, I could be wrong about this one. I think it was ISIS-K also attacked the Iranian city of Kerman a few years back. Some terror attack that went on there, and the attackers are all Tajiks as well, similar to the attackers.
Another American enemy. What a surprise!
Yeah, it's like, I mean, I can understand ISIS going against
Russia
because I can understand ISIS going against Russia because Russia is one of the main reasons why ISIS no longer exists in a really dangerous capacity anymore. In the case of Syria,
yeah, they've defeated them in Syria mostly. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but China, I mean, that just seems random to me. Like, because I mean, China, I mean, yeah, but the Uyghurs, I mean, I don't know, but still, I mean, even someone like Erdogan, who has it all of pan-Turkic nationalism, Islamism, however you wish to call it, even he doesn't care about the Uyghurs, and the Uyghurs are Turkic Muslims. So even Erdogan doesn't care about the Uyghurs. It just seems even more outlandish that ISIS all of a sudden be pivoting towards Uyghurs.
But the question there is how much money is Turkey receiving for in like trade with China? Because there might be political reasons why they don't want to touch that issue.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I know
perfectly possible.
I know like the UAE and Saudi is involved.
Can I just say, Aaron Hook? Can I just say that Aaron Hook, who has a fine picture of Lord Salisbury as his avatar, says that I was surprised they were Tajiks and not Chechens who had fallen for Islamic attacks in Russia. Of course, you've got to realize that, I'm sure Mitch will agree with me on this, loads of Chechens are now fighting for Russia in Ukraine. Are they not, Mitch?
Well, you've got 3 main groups of Chechens. You've got the Chechens who are living in Chechnya these days, who are more pro-Kadyrov or just generally, but just all right with Russia. The second group who live in the West, living on like maybe mainly in France, I believe. I don't know about how many in Germany, but they live on government handouts, same as Algerians and Moroccans. So you might as well group them in that way. And then the third ones are the Chechens who are fighting on the Ukrainian side in the war. I won't be surprised. I mean, be fair, the Chechens have been fighting the Ukrainian side since like 2014, and we've had a lot of losses because, predictably, I mean, like, because the Russians would.
But Mitch, there's also a lot of Chechens fighting for the Russians, are there not?
Well, that's the first group. Like, as in the Chechens will all fight with Russia. Like,
there's a lot of Chechens fighting for the Russians.
Yeah, that's my point. That's my point with the first group is you get the first group who, they're all right with Russia. Like, they've got no animus against Russia like they did, like, say, 20 years ago. Or they're just doing it out of pro-Kadyrov sympathies. Either way, they're not enemies of Russia for the time being, at the very least, if not for a long time ahead.
I see Aubrey in the chat saying we're being very anti-American on this episode, and I guess we have been. But I would just point out, look, I've had this conversation with Aubrey in private. There is a fair amount of evidence that both the CIA and MI6, the British Overseas Intelligence Agency, have both been involved with some parts of ISIS. Yeah, and maybe specifically ISIS-K, I'm not sure, but certainly with some parts. There's a fair amount of evidence about that these days. And ISIS-K does seem to only attack enemies of America, it has to be said.
Yeah. It's also
Mossad might well be involved in that. That's perfectly possible.
Yeah, I've heard it said about something along the lines of, so ISIS have attacked every single Muslim country in the Middle East, pretty much. The one country they attacked and apologized to was Israel because of a stray missile or something like that. I can't find anything to corroborate that story other than what people are telling me, but I won't be surprised if that's actually true, to be fair. But ISIS actually did apologize to Israel for some stray missile. So if that is actually true, then yeah, it's not just MI6 and CIA. It's also got Mossad, who've also steered elements of ISIS to be cannon fodder, I suppose you would say, against enemies of America, whether it be Iran, Russia, and China. Because I mean,
I would a lot of people say that, you know, in terms of being anti-American, you know, I just pointed out that there's a lot of evidence that not only the American CIA but also British MI6 have been involved with ISIS. So I don't know, maybe I'm being anti-American and anti-British, but I'm not anti-British in the least degree. I'm just anti the current British globalist regime. So, you know.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd say the same about MI6. So I was just going to say, I'd say the same about MI6 as well. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if MI6. I mean, it's like, you know, Budanov was trained by MI6, like in charge of FSB. I mean, not FSB, the SBU. He was trained by MI6, not by the CIA. So, and I've heard of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. A lot of their priests received training from British intelligence, as well as like more British priests are like intelligentsia sort of types, you know, that like a lot of British networks, shall we say. So it's not, I'm not saying, so yeah, like as anti-American as I will be, I'm also anti my own country in some respects, in terms of how we involve ourselves in squabbles that have got nothing to do with us.
Oh, look, Mitch, I'm sure you will have heard the same as I have, that many people say that Zelensky, the rat king of Ukraine, his bodyguard is mostly ex-British SAS guys. And how ex they are is a matter of debate, but, you know.
I mean, how many? I mean, you can. I mean, I don't know what. Oh, I lost my point. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that's actually true. But I mean, I mean, the only other thing I've heard about Ukraine recently, in terms of like British volunteers, is you got two Brits who are fighting on the Russian side, who I think it was a son of a Daily Mirror, decried as traitors. And I go, yeah. And I'm just up there thinking, okay,
how can he afford excess SAS? That's easy, mate, because he's getting so many millions and millions and millions of dollars and pounds from America and Britain. That's how he can afford it.
Yeah, I think it was
basically the
Victoria
whole
Nuland.
Ukrainian state apparatus is being paid for by the Americans at the moment, with like loads of help from Britain and other European countries and Australia, etc. So yeah.
Yeah, so I wouldn't be surprised if it's like, I mean, you get this whole rhetoric about how after the war Ukraine's going to get some baby boom, or that they're going to recover like Germany did after World War II, and it's just like, okay, but
Yeah, right.
I mean, well, it's not even just a demographic; it's also we're just going to they're going to be saddled with so much debt after this. But even if, I mean, on one hand, you might say, oh well, you got the civil service and the more admin staff from within Ukraine. They're only working because they can still grift off a Western taxpayer. But as soon as I don't know how far the war would have to go for those people to leave Ukraine. But once once it gets really bad for Ukraine in terms of like armed forces collapsing and whatnot, all those guys will just disappear into Poland, and they'll just get cushy jobs over there. And that's one issue.
And also bear in mind, vast numbers of Ukrainian women have moved overseas, and vast numbers of Ukrainian men have been killed.
Yeah, it's also like you take, oh no. I mean, I was reading earlier about so when the Ukrainians split off from the Soviet Union, you know, like the Americans were deceived by the Ukrainians as well. Like Leonid Kravchuk, I think his name was, because he was selling his pipe dream to the Americans about how Ukraine's going to be like Kiev is going to be like some Washington DC on the Dnieper and all this, you know, or what Ukraine's going to be the wealthiest and most democratic country ever in that region of the world. And it's just like, okay, because they said Ukraine has got plenty of industry and whatnot, but all the cheap energy that industry relied upon all came from Siberia. So unless, I don't know, for whatever reason, Russia's going to be subjected to basically become an American puppet or whatever, or just like bound by treaty to support Ukraine in a hypothetical winning scenario, it's like Ukraine would be screwed over either way, even if it won the war, because so even in the 2000s, like Russia was still being generous with trade in terms, like giving
which it's not going to do.
No, it's just going to be a position where, as I said, like even if Ukraine were to win this war, I mean,
I don't think there's any chance of Ukraine winning the war myself. But anyway,
no, I'm saying even if I'm just saying if there was some sort of miracle on the Dnieper where for whatever reason Ukraine were to win this war, for however, you know, let's say hypothetically they won, even if it did win the war, but still lost anyway because Russia's not going to give Ukraine any more cheap energy, so Ukraine's going to have to pay America for cheap energy. I mean, not cheap energy, to energy in total. Do you really think? I don't think
expensive energy. You mean just like the Europeans are? Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's like, I mean, you got Germany,
the rump Ukraine that will be left after the war, anyway. Yeah.
I mean, the Orthodox Church memorandum I mentioned earlier. They're saying that they want Putin to annex all of Ukraine. So there are some elements of the Russian elites who want to annex the entire bloody country.
I still think Russia will take basically up to around the Dnieper River and probably the main port city as well. That's still what I think Russia's going to end up doing.
Yeah,
Odessa is what I mean. That's still what I think Russia will end up doing at the end of this war. In fact, if they don't, then it won't be a major victory for the Russians. Well, I mean, Dry Blokes in the chat says Putin is 71. How many years does he have? Well, compare his age to Biden, who is obviously senile now, and even Trump. You know, he's 10 years younger than those dudes for a start. So, you know. I would also agree with North Sea that being anti-gay American empire is not the same as being anti-American. I know a lot of Americans who I really like. None of them run the American government, though, you know? None of them run the American government. Any final thoughts on this one, Rupert?
No, nothing in particular. I mean, in terms of what Russia actually ends up taking, that probably just depends more so on the circumstances of the war, both how much they've ended up losing and what they need to present to the domestic population in order to justify the sacrifice, and also just in terms of what the situation on the field is looking like, and if they've got a pathway back into Western accepted political circles, then they might be more tempted to moderate their demands. Otherwise, there's really no point in going for anything less than all of Ukraine, basically, at the very least in puppet government form. Unless they obviously think that the cost of actually administering it all will be more than they get back. But even then, I don't know. Might still go for it anyway, just to kind of bolster the tripartite nation idea.
I'm just not sure it would be worth the Russians while taking Western Ukraine, because it's Western Ukraine which is anti-Russian, whereas Eastern Ukraine isn't. Eastern Ukraine is largely pro-Russian, and so long as, I mean, to me, the thing is that they've got to have a good barrier, which is obviously going to be the Dnieper River, and probably some sort of buffer zone beyond that. And they really want Odessa and the coast, because a landlocked Ukraine is much less of a threat to the Russians, and in particular to the Russian Black Sea Fleet. So that would be my thinking. But I mean, who knows?
Well, look at it this way.
Tell, I guess
they have essentially 3 allies-ish in Europe. None of them have a coastline, and all of them are accessible by land if they take all of Western Ukraine, at least making it a friendly power. So they would actually then have the possibility of creating a proper European bloc which can rival the EU. And once you've got that in place, the EU versus this other bloc have to start playing off against one another in order to, potentially offer things to other countries that might be a little bit borderline, like maybe a Bulgaria or a Romania.
Yeah, you make a good point, Rupert. I mean, as Sonny Jim said in the chat, there's Transnistria. There's also obviously Serbia, which is a big-time Russian ally.
That's what I'm saying. Plus Hungary and Slovakia, which would all be accessible.
Yeah. Yeah, you reasonable point. Reasonable point. I guess time will tell in the end. Before we wind up, I just want to say that next week we're going to have a special guest on the show, which is Endeavour. Endeavour is a very good Canadian YouTuber who had me on his show to review Zulu a few weeks ago. And he does a review with Morgoth of pretty good movies, actually. I kind of like that show. So Endeavour will be on the show next week as a special guest. Thank you to my guests this week, Adaman, Rupert August, and Mitch. Rupert, is there anything you would like to shill before we close up? Like your YouTube channel or anything else?
Yep, probably just my YouTube channel. Sorry. Just my YouTube channel. Gradually uploading.
Rupert August, is it?
Yeah, I should
is that Rupert August?
Yep. I am still uploading on it, and
all right, I
shall be working on a script tonight. But
I will put a link in the. Yeah, I'll put a link in the chat later on, guys, if you want to find Rupert August's channel. That'll be in there later on. It won't be in there immediately, but it will be later on. Mitch, anything you wanted to share on it?
No, not from me.
Okay. Well, as I say, thank you very much to my guests, Salman, Rupert, and Mitch. We'll see you next week when we'll have special guest Endeavour on the stream. This was a bit of a different stream, went in a direction I wasn't kind of thinking it would go on, but I guess, he goes, yes, he does. So I can say that. I will recommend Rupert August's channel. And we'll see you next week, guys. Don't let the bastards grind you down. And we'll see you next week.